Welcome to this video on why I've been using generative AI or LLMs for qualitative analysis completely wrong. The reason I'm recording this video is because what I see more and more and right and left is that people try to use LLMs or chatbots for qualitative analysis. And then they try certain things and it doesn't work for them. And then the conclusion is it's all bad, you cannot use it. And then you see people commenting and say, yeah, I always knew it and we cannot use it. And it's all blah, 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 all these reasons why we cannot use it. My name is Dr. Susanne Friese. I'm in the space of generative AI and qualitative analysis ever since basically ChatGPT came out. So that's 2.5 years ago. And before that, I have been translating qualitative methodology into computer software, so to speak, and digital ways of supporting qualitative data analysis in kind of different ways. And when I started experimenting with LLMs and also how to use them for qualitative analysis, instead of trying something out and it doesn't work, just blaming the tool, it's more like, okay, we need to experiment further and see what actually works. And a lot of to do also has to do with knowing, well, the strengths of LLMs and what they actually can do, and not like playing on their weaknesses. And we know plenty of them, hallucination and bias and not being reliable and their variability, so that they give you different results every time you're using them. So let me start out with point number one. A lot of people now try to use LLMs for coding data. Well, they say coding. What they're using or trying to use it for is for tagging data, because coding is a methodological process, and attaching a label to a data segment, that process is tagging, and that's a very time-consuming process. So of course it's understandable that people read and hear about LLMs and say, oh, it makes work more efficient. So how can it actually support our workflow? So what they're trying to do is looking at their current workflow and trying to make the LLM fit. Somehow that doesn't seem to work quite well. And now we also see that the qualitative researcher also gets some help from technical people, so that people from computer science departments that then, instead of just using a chatbot, they write more complex script in Python in order to help qualitative researchers to tag data. And I'll tell you why this doesn't work. An LLM, what it can do very well, can read the entire interview or 5 of your interviews, but it cannot stick codes to data segments, because if it goes through the next time, it doesn't remember what it did before. So in order to kind of appropriate that process, you either need to chunk your own text and put, if you have an interview transcript, put it all in like cells of an Excel file. Well, every sentence, every paragraph, well, your choice. No, that's a lot of work. And then what you have done, you have chunked your text in a way that is probably not very meaningful. But this is also what the computer scientists do in order to make code labels stick to data segments. They chunk the text. But then there is one other important thing, that LLMs always work sequentially. So go through your data, and even if it's chunked, especially if it's chunked, then you ask it to tag, let me call it tagging. And then once they're down here, they don't know what they have done up here. And if they're in the next document, they also don't know what they have done in the first document. So again, computer scientists try to accommodate for that. And because if an LLM goes through and tags a document, it might, quickly have 50, 60 codes or even more. And then again, in the next interview and in the next interview. And some of these labels might be quite similar. So they go through and look for the similarities in labels, and then let the LLM also merge labels that are similar or even the same. But then what's happening is you only operate on the level of the labels. You're not operating on the level of the data. So we have a first summarization there. And then from the initial codes, categories are formed. But again, on those initial labels. So we have a summarization of a summarization. And then when the bill seams, Well, and again, same. LLMs are very good in pattern recognition, so they like to go through and recognize the patterns. And then themes are built based on, well, summarizing codes to categories, summarizing to themes. Well, that's not how qualitative researchers build themes. Well, and the next thing is also if you let it run through again, the codes might be different because LLMs are generative. And there is this thing called temperature, and a lot of people don't know about that. So you could set the temperature to 0, and then the results would probably be more reliable, because 0 means the LLM always will come up with the most likely results. And if you increase the temperature, the more creative it is going to become. And sometimes you want that. If you want to do brainstorming, you want an LLM that is creative. But if you now work with a chatbot, a general chatbot, where there's no settings, and most people I talk to work with ChatGPT, guess what the temperature is? 0.7 on a scale from 0 to 1. So you get a very creative LLM there. And then think about, and maybe you have done that in the past, uploaded your open-ended questions from the survey. Or you can say, after what I've said, this is structured, we have chunks there, and there it makes sense because it's short, open-ended questions. And well, then let's also say we have a deductive coding frame, so we give the AI also some code, so we don't get into the problems of inductive code building that I just explained, and let the AI do that. Temperature is set to 0.7. Then you do it again, and you had a very creative LLM. So the results are going to be different next time you do it. The false assumption here that people think they can, if they give something to an LLM, they press a button and they will get a final result. The result is never final with an LLM. I call it deterministic, so that you add something to it and expect already an outcome, so a final outcome that the LLM is actually producing that. So that brings me to the point of thinking about how LLM actually work. As mentioned, they can read your entire interview, so they understand the context. Based on that, or also if you give it more than one interview, they can build themes. So that's one little thing you have to be aware with the context window, so you can just throw hundreds of documents at it. But up to 200 to 500 pages, it depends on which LLM you're working. That is kind of the short-term memory of an LLM. So it can reasonably analyze that once and then based on that suggest themes. But it doesn't need all the coding. It can just right away produce those themes. And those who have tried it and benchmarked with data they have coded, because that's what lots of people are doing, then say, well, this is kind of the same what I got, at least 80% match of the results I got after weeks and weeks and weeks of coding. The LLM doesn't need coding. So why do we want to force it into coding? Because kind of we need it in order to derive themes. An LLM doesn't need it. So keep that thought for a moment. We're coming back to the theme building capacity. I want to step back to those other ways where people don't actually try to use it for tagging data. I've seen prompts like, here is my interview, and now conduct a grounded theory analysis, or create an inductive category frame based on the approach by, and then they name a certain author. So there's just one prompt they throw at the LLM and then complain that it doesn't work. Well, surely it doesn't work. Next time you do it, you get a different answer, and so on. So that, of course, comes up again and again, and the bias that's in there, and the hallucination. Well, if you don't want hallucination, then you don't work with a general purpose chatbot like ChatGPT, because that's when you get hallucination. So if you want to have results that are only based on your documents, you have to work with a system that has a built-in RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, because then the results will be only based on the documents you have uploaded. Yeah, and then the next expectation might be they throw at it a prompt. It is already doomed to fail from the very beginning. And then they complain that the AI doesn't come with the same results as what they did manually. Well, the AI is always friendly. It always wants to give us an answer. So it always does. And it somehow looks plausible. But when you take a closer look, it's not a good result. And that's when then people blame the tool instead of reflect and rethink, maybe what I've been doing and how I've been using that LLM or I've been working with that AI assistant is not the right way of doing it. What are the expectations? I mean, how on earth can you expect an LLM to do something in one prompt where it is an iterative process? Grounded theory, the whole methodology is iterative. You don't start with when you have all your interviews. You start with your first interview. And then you start with open coding. You can't do one of the advanced steps when you just have your first interview. This is kind of a mismatch from the very beginning. And also with all the other coding processes, coding, proper coding, not tagging, and building a code system is an iterative process. So if you approach the LLM with wrong expectations, well, you should not wonder and complain that whatever you get is not the results you were actually hoping for. And Harvard University has actually done some study, not with qualitative research, but more generally about effective use of people working with chatbots. Surprisingly, they found that there was a whole cohort of people who actually performed worse. And then there was another cohort of people who performed much better, delivered high quality results and so on. So then they took a closer look. And exactly what the problem is that I see with qualitative research or qualitative analysis is what they also found, is that those who performed well used the AI assistant as kind of a team member, as in collaboration. If you work with somebody who's just new on your team, who doesn't know anything about your data, your context, you just say, just code the data. So what do you expect? Probably the results are not very good. So are you then kind of telling the coworker just go out of the door? That's rubbish what you did? No, you probably either ask yourself, well, maybe my instruction wasn't very good, or you sit together with that new coworker and coach it. And that's what you also have to do with your favorite AI assistant. And it might not be ChatGPT, go look around. There are other ones. And each and every one of them also will work in a different way with you. If you experiment, you might find a favorite one that you work better with or a favorite one for different tasks. That can also be the case. So what do you need to do? Stop trying to use it for tagging data. Stop giving it one prompt and expecting it to run an entire analysis. And stop using it expecting that you get a final outcome. A good high-quality outcome comes only when you work in a cooperative way in dialogue with your AI assistant. And if you have no idea how that works, I recently was teaching a course and gave people a GPT I've been written for developing an interview guide. And that is a very iterative process where I envision the workflow. And when they went through that workflow, it suddenly kind of the lights went on, so to speak, said, oh, this is how it could work in a collaborative manner. I link that in the description so you can try it out, whether you need an interview guide or not, but maybe it just kind of helps you to see how that cooperation can actually work. So instead of blaming the tool because you hit a weakness of an LLM or the nature of LLMs, that they give you different responses every time you ask because they're generative and so on. Look at their strengths. They're very good in summarizing and pattern recognition. And that's why that team building works so well, because everything kind of fits in their short-term memory, and that's why they can give you those themes. Also, when you still want to work with categorical type of thinking, when you work with your LLM and then want to extract categories or get ideas for categories, that is also a form of summarization. So if you start asking it for things and taking those themes not as final outcome, but as a starting point, as an inspiration, And then you have not been part of building that theme because we haven't done all the coding to actually get there. So now we're a little bit behind, so to speak. The LLM immediately gives us the theme. Now we have to work with the LLM together and ask questions about the theme, dig deeper, ask it for examples and retrieving data based on the theme, because it can do that very well. It doesn't need to code. You can, if you have a theme around trust, well, then ask it to show you examples in data where it's about trust or mistrust, for everything that you can relate to trust, circumstances where a certain situation was triggered, and so on and so forth. Now it's up to you to ask those questions and to learn something more about your data together with your AI assistant. And then at the end of the dialogue, you can say, okay, now, we discussed all these aspects, so please now give me some abstract concepts here based on what we did, or, what could be possible categories. So you can do that very well again. So you don't have to give up the way of how you think about analysis, but you have to, or you can, I would have to say, you can now do it in a different way, and you don't have to do it alone anymore. You can do it with your technical assistant here. Another weakness that you may know is, I mentioned that if you throw too much data at it, it starts to summarize too much, because that's what it can do very well. So knowing that it does that, so just work case-based. And if you want detail, if you want nuance, just work with one interview at a time, or with one document at a time, depending what you're analyzing. Also in a literature review, if you throw at it all your 20 articles, you sometimes get, it's mixing up everything. Then don't blame it. Just say, okay, that's too much. Just go document by document and ask precise questions, not, well, what's in the document. I want to know about A, B, C, D they wrote about, or what are the results? What is the sample? What is their conclusion? And then you ask very specific questions, document by document, and then you have it all in a row, and that helps you a lot. It sounds maybe, if you have to do a document, how much time does it take? And you will save time. You just need to try this out. It will save you lots of time. As mentioned, I started experimenting about 2.5 years ago, played with different tools and learned a lot with playing with those tools. But then I saw these tools going in different direction, offering tagging again. And I said, well, we don't need to do that. Or coming with press that button and we do thematic analysis for you, all done for you in one click. And I felt, if I want to see my vision of how to work with LLMs, when I want to see that vision to become reality, I have to write my own app. And that's why we have QInsights. So all my experience, my ideas are incorporated in that app. If this is all new to you now, and I'm not so sure how that all works with the talking and stuff and the conversation, well, we have implemented a function which is called guided analysis. And with that guided analysis, it's a workflow I implemented. So the AI assistant is going to kind of take you by the hand and walks you through. So I kind of wanted to teach you how that actually works with that back and forth between the AI assistant and you. So it's something in there that helps you actually to see how that process works. And everybody can try it for free. You just have to register and upload a few documents. And if you don't have transcripts right now, just try it with some documents you have. Because whatever you learn there, you can also use generally when working with AI. Because it's not about qualitative data analysis that works best in this conversational style. Everything that you do with an LLM works best in that style. And if you try it otherwise, you will always end up with that, or it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't work. So I hope you have learned something about now how not to use AI, and on the positive side, how you do work with them. So if you're interested in generative AI, how to work with LLMs in qualitative research, well, hit that subscribe button so you will be informed if I put out another video on this topic again.
Whispers, let's dive in. Qualitative flow, leading the way. Discover the tales in a digital sway.